All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Temiskaming Art Gallery. We are super pleased to introduce Joseph Muscat and welcome him back to the gallery. Joseph was actually recently introduced and invited to come to the gallery for the Ontario Society of Artists group exhibition. Unfortunately, this was slated for March of 2020, and we all know how the world kind of stopped in 2020. So luckily there was a virtual exhibition that was widely received. So now we are so pleased to welcome Joseph back in person, welcome him back in the gallery with his new exhibition, Graphic Chats, which is it's about communications in the modern age and how we are bombarded by these short texts, 140 characters, and slew of emojis. It represents information, but also the misinformation and misrepresentation that we can have within the modern age of communication. But without further ado, I'll let you introduce the man of the hour, Joseph Muscat. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabrina. So I'm going to start by thanking a few people first, starting with Melissa Laporte, who's the director of the gallery, who invited me here a couple of years ago. Just before the pandemic, I think, was the time that we agreed that we're going to do something in 2021 or 2022. But anyway, I'm sorry she's not here with us today. Sabrina and Jasmine, who so warmly welcomed me when I arrived in the middle of a rainstorm on Thursday afternoon, and they helped me bring the artwork in. And you know what? They hung the show. Normally I hang my own work, but the two of them just went to task and they did a fantastic job. Not so easy when you have a curved wall and all kinds of nooks and crannies, but they did a fantastic job. I also want to thank Clara Norona, who traveled just this afternoon all the way from Toronto. Clara was an intern student with me since January from the University of Guelph-Humber. And she really took care of all the design work, the brochure, the invitation, and ad in Border Crossings magazine that's coming up next month, as well as she helped me with the social media things that needed to be done. So I'm so glad she made it, and that's what we were waiting for. I wanted to make sure that she was here to hear it. A lot of you may be asking why graphic chats, and I'm going to use my notes, otherwise I get lost in my own thinking. In 2014, I did a series of work called Interface, and the work addressed how the internet and social media is changing the way that we see, that we think, that we behave. And I did this whole series of works, very different from this one, but it really kind of charged me to continue searching for meaning in the digital age. The interface phase lasted 3 whole years between 2014 and 2017. And then in 2018, I started this series of graphic chats. And what I wanted to do is I tried to imagine when you're online tweeting or chatting and all, going from one person to another, from one thing to another, and what each one of those chats may look like visually. And I was not so sure how I was going to tackle such a situation. In the meantime, I was working on 2 murals, one 5 feet by 50 feet long, and the other one 5 feet by 28 feet long. And the murals were done primarily with stencils. I would draw, cut the stencil, and then paint the image on various areas of the mural. And before I put it straight on the mural, which was more permanent, I would test the image out on pieces of paper. So by the time I finished these 2 gigantic murals, I had a stack of little tiny stenciled images, painted images, sketches drawn. And normally I would say, okay, you know, these were the prep things, I don't need them. But bang, I had this idea that I can start putting these things together in story form, almost like a graphic novel. And thus Graphic Chats was born. So the whole process just took off in 2018. And I finished the last couple in 2022 this year, and they are on that wall, that adjacent wall down there. Those were the last two pieces that I did, and a couple of the small ones here. And it grew on me to the point where I started then just drawing and sketching and painting and doing things always in small. I abandoned my sketchbooks, which I normally use for that purpose. And as soon as I gather enough material, I decide on the size and I start playing around with the positioning of the images and with the sequence. Now, how do I arrive at how things go together? That's a mystery. It's a mystery to me as well. I usually listen to a lot of CBC and podcasts when I'm working, sometimes music as well. And so all that information subconsciously goes in and it comes out into these sketches. And then the positioning and the gluing is something that, like I said, I would leave a piece with the images free to move for a number of weeks because I work on multiple pieces at the same time. When I think something is really happening, I just take a stab and firm it up and glue it together, and that's the story. The other thing I wanted to touch on, and I need to consult my my notes here. The idea of the graphic novel was also very impactful on me because today young people, and I by the way, I have taught high school and university art for many, many years. And I recall just before I retired in 2011 from teaching that kids and students were really quite heavy duty on the graphic novel. So that too sort of had an impact on the looks of these graphic chats. All they need now are, you know, little captions on them with the storyline. But if any of you are teachers here and you want to bring your students at some point, and you let each student choose a piece and write a story, or choose one piece and have all the students write stories and see what different kind of outcomes you get. Because they really stir up the imagination and the thought process. And that was also part of my my teaching background. You look at the titles as well. The titles are very much tongue-in-cheek and whimsical, but they are really grounded in the digital terminology and with, like I said, with a little bit of a spin in them. And that's basically the story of the work. I don't know if I'm done with this. I've told myself I've had enough because every 2, 3, 4 years, I tend to jump on something quite different. I've had many exhibitions in many different places, but art dealers have a very hard time with artists like me because I don't settle down with one thing and I keep doing it for the rest of my life. No, thank you. You know, I come up with new ideas and I want to explore and I want to discover new things. So whether this takes an angle or some kind of a route in the future, I don't know. During the pandemic, I started doing a series of works which I'll be showing at Propeller Gallery in Toronto in July. And they had to do with the corona. I turned the image of the coronavirus into floral motifs. In other words, turning something quite negative and scary into something quite beautiful and appealing. And then I did another mini-series during the pandemic called Cabin Jitters, because I know a lot of us were exactly experiencing the cabin fever of, everything locked up and so on. And then I did a third series, and you can see this work. I think I have some of this work posted on my website. The third one is called Waiting, which is what we're all doing right now, waiting for this damn pandemic to disappear so we can carry on with our lives. But I'm happy that you all made it here this afternoon, and I hope you enjoy the show, and I thank you for it. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Challenge me.
You actually come up with stories, your own stories, forming your own stories.
Good idea. I figured somebody's gonna just gonna say to me, "Oh, really? You can pull a story out of this." So sometimes between my painting sessions, I'd sit down and take my sketchbook and I select one work, and I can write a story. Okay, it may not make an awful lot of sense, but I'll pull the images together, and one moves into another. So it's not done. I don't arrange the images to make the story. The story comes after. And if you ask me half an hour later, the story may be very different. But good question. Yeah.
Melissa has a question for you.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about your choice of color palette?
Oh, color to me is very innate. It's second nature. And I love red, but I like black and white as well. I can't really come up with a reason for using color other than when I'm working, I know that warm, cool colors, they need to coexist, and you need to place them in certain places so the work is balanced and it's not overpowered on one side, that it's nicely distributed. But in terms of choosing red over green, take a kid, put some paper and give them some coloring pencils. They just grab whatever and they draw or color whatever comes to them at the time. And that's how I work as well. It's very intuitive, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, then we'll go with another color or with a different value of the color. Color, however, does carry its weight. Okay, it carries symbolism and impact, and to some it could mean one thing, to others it could mean another thing. I was born in the Mediterranean. I come from a culture of color, okay? Not to mention that the sky is hardly this color. It's always blue with bright sunshine, which makes the colors very vibrant. So I'm not afraid to use color. It's very much part of my psyche and my being. Other questions? Yeah.
Was there any piece that was kind of difficult for you to make, or that you thought might be too controversial to make, or?
Another good question. Yeah, there are things in the images that are subtle and not so subtle. So for instance, I have an art consultant, an art dealer in California. And just to brag a little bit, she just sold 4 of my paintings to Stanford University. So I'm ecstatic about that. And when I had showed her this series of works, and by the way, the work that Stanford chose were the recent series that I did on the coronavirus. Stanford just built a research hub building. This is where all the brains at Stanford come together and create the latest. And they chose these coronavirus motifs that I turned into floral patterns. So anyway, when she saw this work, she said, I can't handle guns. There's one painting there with a gun right in the middle. Gun violence, unfortunately, is very much a part of our culture. We hear it all the time. Thank goodness it's not as bad in our country as it is in the United States or elsewhere. But there are images that could perhaps stir up certain things. So for instance, that painting may be a difficult painting to show where there are young children, because they may take it into a different message. They may take a different meaning from the message. But that's the reality. And at the time, I was probably listening to something on the news that should be up enough to put the image there. Other questions?
I noticed a number of repetitions of designs in different scripts. Have you got an association, for example, a sofa?
Yes. Well, I have a daughter who is a clinical psychologist. And she lives in California. And the couch is very much a symbol of that. And it was used for that purpose. It's also a symbol of domesticity. And yes, you're right. I do repeat some of the images because that's what ties the work together. And one way I can do that is through the process of making the stencils, because then the stencil is there, I can use it in various places. So that's a good observation.
So I noticed in looking at them that I was catching a lot of images that I very strongly relate to Northern Ontario. Are you very familiar with Northern Ontario?
I love Northern Ontario. Yeah, I do. I finally managed to get a cottage about 8 years ago in Barry's Bay, and it's my hiding place. It's as soon as I get there, I deflate. I love the north. It's the air is clean. It's pure. It's energizing. I took a look at a map before I bought this cottage. Actually, it was taken from one of the trips outside of our atmosphere, and it was of Ontario. And there was almost a demarcation between southwest Ontario and north and northeast Ontario. That was a green, dense green area, and then, brown with a little bit of greens here and there. And you could see where the intensity of the trees are, and this is the lung of the province. It's creating our oxygen, and you can see I get emotional about it because I hope we don't lose it. Any other question? But boy, these are great questions. And yeah, the cabin, by the way, I have to tell you this story because that's also Northern Ontario. We have 2 kids. My wife, Kathy's back there. We have 2 kids, 2 adults. Our son lives in Delta, BC. He runs an aerial surveying company there. And our daughter is the clinical psychologist in San Francisco. And when my son was born, I thought, oh my God, 2 kids, an artist, how are things going to go? And my mother-in-law came to help out, and I took off. I went to the Union Station in Toronto and hopped on the Northlander. And I did a beeline right up to Cochrane, and then I hopped on the Polar Bear Express and went all the way to Moosonee. And when I got there, I thought, what the hell am I here for? There's nothing to look at here except the trees. But on my way up, I kept seeing these little cabins, and the train would stop. And I would say, where are we? Why are we stopping here? And some guy with a beard this big would come out of this little hut or cabin with a chimney and the smoke billowing, and would receive a parcel from the train or hand the parcel to the train. It was his means of communication with the world. And that left a huge impact on me. And the cabin, now I've done so many paintings of this cabin, large pieces with the cabin. And that to me is very much the Northern Ontario, the people who settled in such inhospitable areas and you know, and made a community out of it. So very, very strong symbol for me. Okay, I think that's a fair number of questions. Thank you for asking and thank you for being here. And if you have other questions you want to ask me personally, I'd be happy to answer. Okay.
Thank you so much, Joseph. That was such a pleasure.